And as we begin our services today, we're going to kindly ask that we turn off or silence all cell phones, electronic devices. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Rabbi Michael Parise. I'm the rabbi of Temple Sinai of Cinnaminson. On behalf of the family, I'd like to thank you for coming today as we honor the memory of a truly remarkable man. In Judaism, it's believed that the body and the soul are two distinct entities. At birth, they come together, and at death, they separate. Now, whether you believe in the soul, as I'm often saying, I do, one thing is for certain. The people we've loved, the people we've lost, they live on, if nowhere but right here. Everything Ed was, all his memories, all his stories, all his joys, all his hopes, now live on in each and every one of you. To honor his memory, you make him a part of you. That is our job. That is our mission. And I know we will succeed. Shaviti Adonai lenegedi tamid. I have set the eternal always before me. God is at my side. I shall not be moved. Therefore does my heart exult and my soul rejoice. My being is secure, for you will not abandon me in death, nor let your faithful one see destruction. You show me the path of your life. Your presence brings fullness of joy. Enduring happiness is your gift. Mizmor leDavid, Adonai roi lo exar. Please join me in reciting Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And let us all say, Amen. As many of you are probably aware, Ed loved folk music. And there are words from Kohelet that have been used in many songs, famously by the Byrds. Not quite folk music, but it always reminds me of folk music. For everything there is a season. For everything there is a season. A time for every experience under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted. A time to tear down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to grieve and a time to dance. A time to throw stones and a time to gather stones. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to seek and a time to lose. A time to keep and a time to discard. A time to tear and a time to sow. A time to keep silence, and a time to speak. Edgar Stern was born on July 19, 1927, to Elsa and Otto Stern. He was born and raised in Speyer, Germany. His mother, Elsa, was a millinery. They made hats, women's hats. And Otto was, he worked in a chemical factory. He called it the lab. And they had a very nice, life in the German countryside. He had a great fondness for his grandparents. And many of you know Ed wrote a book called The Peppermint Train. And in it, he describes these 10 square miles that he would travel to be with his family, going back and forth upon this peppermint train, because it smelled of peppermint from transporting of the crops from town to town. He had what can only be described as a contradictory childhood. In the one sense, he was raised in this most idyllic, beautiful German countryside, full of wonder, traveling on his favorite train, becoming of age at a time of rising hatred and Adolf Hitler. And you can tell this young, inquisitive, reflective, thoughtful, possibly overthinker of a child was often confused by what was happening around him. On the one hand, he had family who loved him, but as his society changed, so did the faces of his neighbors and his friends. This was a very hard time, as you can imagine, for a young child. He would go to school, and they would have to show videos of Adolf Hitler, and at the end, all the students would make the Hail Hitler sign. But all the Jews in the class would look at each other and whisper, "Do we have to do that?" "No," they would say, "we don't have to do that." As things gotten worse progressively, Otto and Elsa probably saw the writing on the walls. They knew they had to leave, to make that horrible decision to leave behind family. Family was everything, and yet they knew they had to go. But where to go? Where to travel to? There were only a few places Jews could be welcomed in those times. Possibly South Africa, possibly Argentina, possibly Palestine. But it was America, where they had family, where they would travel to. Ed tells this amazing story about traveling on a ship called the Manhattan. Very fitting, for that was the location, their final destination. And they would arrive only days before July 4th, where for the very first time, Ed describes seeing the fireworks, that sign of liberty, that sign of freedom, that sign that persecution that him and his family had faced might have been in the rearview mirror. When they came to America, it was not easy, as it would be for any refugee family who did not speak the language nor had jobs, and yet somehow they thrived, somehow they succeeded, especially young Ed. How did he thrive? How did he succeed? Someone who barely could speak English was a spelling bee champion. I don't even understand it. But he would go on to win spelling bees. He was so committed, possibly to fitting in, possibly just to succeeding. But he loved his new home. And within a year, he would even shed his German accent. Ed was a wonderful student. He loved poetry even from a young age. His father would say to him often, "You don't want to be a teacher? Who would want to be a teacher? Get a trade." But he knew he had this passion in his heart. And so he begged his father to let him study poetry, and he finally relented. He finally gave in. Him and his father had a very tense relationship. He was often detached. He would find it ironic their last name was Stern because he could be a little strict. But I think he loved his father deep down. And many years later, they would maybe come to understand each other better. Ed would eventually graduate high school and go to college, City College, where he attempted to study chemistry, but that was never for Ed. He knew that was never going to work. He joined the Army, took a year off in deferment, served his country, had his fine uniform, looked like a true American, a true GI. That's what he said. He eventually would go on to get his master's at Adelphi, studying social work, getting a job in Norristown, PA, where he worked at the hospital as a psychiatric social worker. It was not long after that he went to an organization called the Jewish University Club, where former students and current students, young Jews, would gather. It was then he met a nice young Jewish girl named Millie. She was 24, he was 29, and that night she was just struck, mainly by his job. He was a supervisor. He was doing all the things she dreamed of doing. But the salt and pepper hair didn't hurt. He kind of had a look. It was said that night Ed got many phone numbers. Susan said, "What did you do with all those phone numbers?" He said, "I guess I threw them away." And he eventually called Millie 6 weeks later. 6 weeks later. But it must have been love because, they met in 57 and by 58 they were married. And I asked Millie, what was it that attracted you to Ed? And she said, he was quiet, thoughtful, and I love to conversate with him. I love our conversations. We talk about everything, anything and everything. They would move to Germantown and eventually Westchester and have their 3 children. Walt, born in 1960, Debbie, 63, Karen, 64. And they lived your American middle-class upbringing in Westchester, PA. And, they said, Dad could be strict himself. He could have anger, but he always tried to include them in everything he did. They had great family trips where they would visit farms and Niagara Falls and take the car down to Florida. Moments where they could just be a family together. Family, as I said, was everything, Dad. He was a man of incredible hobbies. Hobbies were everything, right? Think about it. He played music, he sang, he did woodworking, he loved to write. This guy was a Renaissance man. And I forget the story. I think somebody told me a story where one of the grandchildren were traveling out of the country and just talking about their grandfather, saying, he does everybody was amazed of all the things he would do. He was also a fierce, fierce advocate for the environment. And while Millie was more the demonstrator, he was a letter writer. He didn't demonstrate. He wouldn't have believed in going out and protesting, but he would write a firm letter. His children would marry their amazing partners who would become like family to him, sons and daughters, I know that. He'd go on to have many, many grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They talked about wonderful stories about Ed playing music with the grandchildren and him passing out instruments. It was like a jam band. Just loved to include everybody in what he was doing. Michael told me a story about stamp camp. He had to fill out an application to go to stamp camp. Ed ran stamp camp. There was no application necessary. But if you're going to do something, you should do it right. He loved without having to say too much. He made people feel seen and heard. He had these amazing qualities. But he also had this deeply reflective nature of wanting to understand the human condition. Why were people the way they were? His childhood no doubt shaped everything he was. And I think that anger, I can't be certain, but I think that anger from what I gathered from this amazing book started to dissipate when he went back to Germany. When he had that cathartic experience of closing that chapter and coming to terms with everything he and his family had experienced. I think that was very important to him to get these words down. This is his legacy. This is Ed Stern. The last time I saw Ed was at the nursing facility about a month ago. And we had a very deep conversation. Many questions, many challenges to me and faith and God and what does it all mean. And I don't have all the answers, but I like to think we found some consensus. But the moment that really sticks out to me, a moment that I think I will always remember, he was having trouble sitting up. He couldn't get out of bed. He was struggling in physical pain. The emotional and spiritual aside, physically, he was suffering. And he was telling me what would make him happy, what would bring him joy in this moment. And he said, Rabbi, I love if I could just listen to folk music one last time. I don't think he understood that in my phone, I could just pull it out and he could listen to it. And I said, well, what song, Ed? Tell me the song. He said, Rabbi, if you could find a song for me called John Henry by Doc Watson, I would just love that. And I played him this. and he was rocking out. He was
John Henry was a steam-driving man, rode steel all over the land. And he said, "For I let that old steam drill beat me down, I'll die with my hammer in my hand, Lord, Lord, die with my hammer in my hand."
You could see his
Now the
smile.
man that played that old steam drill,
I'll never forget it.
he thought he mighty fine, but John Henry going down 14 feet.
So I very much enjoyed every moment I had with Ed. And I still have a wooden flower that he made me in his wood. But I didn't know Ed the way, obviously, a lot of you did. And so I do want others to come up and share their experiences. Walt, I believe, will be coming up to share a little bit first.
There is perhaps no better way for me to have you learn or remember what Dad wanted people to know about him after his death than to use his own words. This is from an obituary he wrote for himself years ago. Ed Stern and his family left Germany in 1936 because of Nazi persecution and settled in New York City. Stern attended grade and high schools in Washington Heights. At City College, he majored in civic administration, and he then received his master's degree in social work at Adelphi College. Subsequently, he studied for a doctorate at the University of Pennsylvania and completed his PhD at Heed University. He was a psychotherapist at various social agencies and clinics in the Delaware Valley, including 16 years at Drake Memorial Health Center, as well as in private practice. Stern published professional articles and also a book. In 1992, his book, The Peppermint Train Journey to a German Jewish Childhood, was published by the University of Florida Press. The book is a memoir of his 2 emotional pilgrimages to his German homeland. There, he re-experienced long-repressed fond memories about his childhood in Germany, as well as bitter feelings about the Holocaust. The ambivalence he felt is the major thread throughout his book. Stern was a man of many hobbies: folk singing with guitar and harmonica, photography, environmentalism, and bicycling. At 85, he started his new hobby of woodcraft, designing and constructing many pieces, including plaques, menorahs, Christmas ornaments, colorful flowers, and a miniature carousel. And I will update with, in his final months of life, he started another hobby of using colored pencils to do color by number pages. Stern served as president of the Friends of Cinnamon Library for many years. He also served on various committees at Temple Sinai in Cinnaminson. And this is from a reflection he wrote for his family, which I think can also apply to his friends. When I die, I want you to celebrate my life. I want you to think about and talk about your lives with me. The good, to be sure, but also the difficult times, because my life was not perfect. Of course, you will first celebrate all the good in me. And you will recount my many achievements. To be sure, you will mourn. You will feel sad that I won't be part of your lives anymore, but you will remember what I left inside you and what I gave you emotionally and intellectually. Your gift to me at the time of my death will be the appreciation and the practice of the worthy things and feelings which you adopted from my life. You will have built upon those to form your own lifestyles. My struggles with fear of death have been much relieved by knowing that I will live on in my offspring. I thank you for being who you are and for the joys you gave me while I was alive. I thank you for following the good in my footsteps. If I wind up in heaven, I will look down and smile at your noble lives. I thank you, my wife, for sharing so many good and wonderful years with me. Through all our trials, I came out loving you. I learned much from you. I became who I was through your significant influence. Indeed, we were meant for each other, thanks to the Jewish University Club where we found each other. During his struggles these last several months, when Dad would get depressed, he found solace in his achievements. He would actually ask Mom or me or my siblings to go through remembering them with him. But what was perhaps his greatest achievement was the way he impacted his family, what he called the worthy things and feelings they had inherited. Some perhaps by nature and some by his nurture. And so evident as he struggled through his 7 weeks in rehab. My mom, my sisters, and I continued to be a seamlessly collaborative support team. Grandchildren came to visit him at the rehab center and when he went home. And more had already booked to fly in from Israel to see him in early August. He knew this and saw how his family are good people, mention, who include being part of family as a key part of their identity. And this was an effect he had had on his children and grandchildren. He died knowing that, and yet part of him lives on in each of us who call him husband or dad or Opa. I look forward to continuing to hear from all of you memories that you have of my dad. As the musical says, who lives, who dies, who tells the stories. Who lives and who dies is out of our hands, but we are the ones who must tell the stories. Lech l'shalom, Dad. You are remembered.
Thank you, Walt. Beautiful. Next, we're going to call up some of the grandchildren, I believe, or Michael will be representing the grandchildren.
Do you know why they call the matzah we eat on Passover Manischewitz? It's because the Jews were wandering in the desert for so long, they sweat so much. Many schwitzed. That's the joke Opa said at our Seder table every year for as long as I can remember. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Michael. I'm the sixth born of Opa's 11 grandchildren, 10 great-grandchildren, not to mention 2 more on the way. On behalf of all 23 of us, I can tell you that our Opa was an incredibly silly, musical, sugar-craving, creative, thoughtful, and loving grandfather. And none of us would be who we are now if it weren't for him. For us, our relationship with Opa started with music. Some of our earliest memories are gathering in his study as he played folk songs on his guitar while we played along with kazoos and tambourines. He'd serenade us with "This Land Is Your Land" and "On Top of Spaghetti" until Bubby came in singing Irene Goodnight, which meant it was time for bed. But Opa didn't reserve the music just for those evening sing-alongs. It was not uncommon for us to be eating breakfast with Bubby while we heard Opa doing his vocal warm-ups in the place in the house with the best acoustics, the shower. Speaking of breakfast, Opa had a sweet tooth, a big one. Elisheva remembers him making himself waffles with ice cream for breakfast, complete with every topping. And at my sister's Emily's wedding, an iconic moment, as Opa wheeled his walker from the dessert table to his seat. We looked over from the cousins' table, only to see the walker was piled high with sweets of all shapes and sizes. And one of my last visits with him was shortly after Frankie's wedding. He didn't care for the food at his rehab facility very much, but he definitely had room in his stomach for a slice of wedding cake. Opa taught us to stand up for what was right. For most of our lives, that manifested itself in his devotion to fighting climate change. But something Sophie said last night gets to the heart of who Opa was. She interviewed him and Bubby for a sociology project last fall and asked both of them what they wanted to pass down to the next generations. Opa said, a sense of fairness and advocating for yourself. His belief in social justice was a core value that he tried to instill in all of us. Late into the night last night, we cousins were texting stories back and forth, some lighthearted, like Jonah remembering Opa's devotion to the Oregon Trail computer game, and others a bit heavier, about how Opa's book, The Peppermint Train, and his experience as a Holocaust refugee are, for many of us, core tenets of our identity. The theme as we collected these snippets from our lifetime with Opa was the amount we value the quality time we spent with him. For many of us, the cabins were our special time with Opa. Beaver Creek Cabins in Strasburg, Pennsylvania, where Opa and Bubby took the family for decades. It was home away from home. Away from all the hustle and bustle of Cinnaminson, New Jersey, it's where we could see Opa most at peace and often happiest. After unpacking the legendary brown box from cabins old and new, he'd laugh as we rolled down the hill wrapped in a blanket, play Scrabble as everyone went to the outlets, or as he called them, the outlaws, sing his folk songs every Sunday night after the barbecue, and frantically gather everyone for a picture on the hill every Monday before we left. For me, that quality time most memorably came in the form of Stamp Camp, a week each summer where I got Bubby and Opa all to myself. Opa and I would spend the days collecting stamps at the dining room table or biking down to the Delaware River. Not many words were spoken on these days, but not many were needed. Opa had a way of making us feel like the most important people in the world by just spending time with us. For a man with so many hobbies to pick from, to choose to spend time with us grandkids, we didn't need many words to feel his love. This morning, Emily sent us all the article from the Philadelphia Inquirer where Opa was featured. It was an article about him picking up woodworking at the ripe young age of 85. Opa talked about how he was in many ways moved to pick up woodworking because of his relationship with his grandfather, a man who, as I understand, also did not take many words to show his love. It's moving to me that in many ways us grandkids also have been moved to pursue our interests because of our relationship with Opa, from playing guitar to advocating for social issues to instilling a sense of fairness in our lives. Opa's music filled our hearts for more than 3 decades. He was a giant in this family. While his guitar may not strum another note, his loving music will be playing in our hearts forever. We love you, Opa.
Thank you. And we're going to call up our last speaker. Do we decide that?
As you've all heard, Dad was a man of many achievements and accomplishments, and he was very, very proud of what he had accomplished and done in his life. And as Walt said, he asked us to remind him, and he even had a list in that folder of all his many achievements. And it was very hard for him toward the end to give up those achievements. And until the end, he never had enough time. In fact, my child Dean and I were just talking about how it's one of our legacies of our family, never having enough time, because there's always something else to do. At the end, he was playing, I think, 10 games of Words with Friends with us, all at the same time, every day. He still had the book by his side, the autobiography of Harry Belafonte, and I think he was still reading it till that last week. I understand that he was in the midst of writing that newspaper article, the follow-up of that Philadelphia Inquirer article that was written when he was 85, about what had happened since then. And as many of you have somewhere in your garden or in your house, all the different pieces of woodworking. And I think there's still some sitting on the table back there, waiting to be done. But it got harder for him in the last months and weeks, and he started to feel defeated. He wasn't sure what was left. What could he still do? I had a conversation with him about a month ago, right when he got home from the rehab. And he was really struggling with, what can I do? I can't do anything for myself anymore. There was so little he could do. And we talked about the fact that we all are called human beings. Why are we called human beings? Why aren't we called human doings? We all do things. But we aren't what we do. We are what we are, what we offer to the world. And he gave, I think that conversation kind of gave him the gift, and then he was able to pass on to us the gift of once again choosing who he wanted to be. And I think he really did. Walt mentioned that he noticed that there was a certain peace that came over him. And I don't know exactly whether it was the conversation. I think it was all a process of him coming to peace with his nearing death and with who he was in the world. So who was Dad? You've all spoken so beautifully and talked a lot about this, but this is kind of what I wrote. He was a man of deep thought and deep feelings from a young age. And I think in the book that was my feeling that always about that book, of that he could just envelop and feel that child's feelings and get into the soul of that child. And he continued it throughout his life, really in many deep ways. We had a lot of deep conversations, he and I, about the meaning of life, about who we are, about our feelings. He was a man of humor and playfulness. And I think a lot of his friends saw that. I didn't actually write this down, but I heard so many people say, he was a good friend. I enjoyed his friendship. But the humor came out sometimes, and it was really funny. I remember once we were sitting around the dinner table, Mom and Dad and Walt and Karen and I, and we were talking about a magazine that had gone out of business. He said, "Life is a dead magazine." Well, we all cracked up. We were on the floor rolling, and he looked at us. Remember that? I don't know if you guys remember this. About 10 minutes later, all of a sudden, he started rolling. He's like, oh, I just got it. He would often, like Michael say, warm up in the shower, but mostly what we heard was, you going to say it for us? Roughly translated as,
Yes, yes, he said, and then it went kaput.
that was the wisdom we got from Dad. And we saw it in his music and all the fun times we had sitting around the campfire in our backyard and singing all of our songs. And there was even a time, I don't know, Karen, if you remember this, but he used to play therapist with us. Karen and I would go in and we would complain about each other so that the therapist could tell us how to deal with our siblings. Dad had a desire to do good for the world. As like you've all said, he was a pioneer in environmental causes, writing those letters and, giving money and I think both he and Mom were very much pioneers in the mental health field. Really, really, really trying to do good for the world and help others. He had a determination to overcome a really difficult childhood, difficult circumstances, to overcome his demons, to find peace with all that he struggled with. And Dean, my child Dean, just said to me in the car, he was an inspiration, I think, for all the grandchildren. Someone who chose to flourish despite difficult circumstances, or maybe because of the difficult circumstances. He had a belief in God. He struggled with it, but I saw it at the end. He prayed to God. He asked God to help him. He believed in the importance of Judaism, in our education, in the support of me and my family as we became more religious. And we spent many, many beautiful Shabbases together. And he so enjoyed them, just the time and the holiness of the day. And he had a desire to leave a legacy, to make a mark on the world. We saw it with his recordings. We all have a stack of cassettes with all of his folk song recordings and all of his writings, both professional and activist, and his book. But his biggest legacy was family. And as I look at all of you guys, this is what he and Mom created. There's always such a respect in our family, support, love. We're different, we're similar. And yet, we all are together. The children, he was so proud of us. He was so proud of each and every one of us and what we, not just what we accomplished, but who we are as people. That we all built upstanding Jewish homes. He was so proud of his grandchildren. What fine, moral, caring, loving people you all are. And of course, his great-grandchildren. Some of them he got to meet even. And I'm sorry for the ones who missed him, but are coming and will spend time soon. That are carrying on Dad's legacy and the legacy of his forefathers. In his last illness, I gained a tremendous gift. Something that, living so far away, I haven't been able to enjoy as much as I wanted, which is a closeness with my siblings. And feeling the love and the dedication and the teamwork and the preciousness of the relationship that I have with you. And I know that's from you, Mom, and from Dad. I I think all the merits of all of us accompany Dad on his journey to the world of truth. And they will carry his soul and raise it up. Every mitzvah we do, every kindness, every caring, every bit of goodness that we bring to the world and carry on his legacy will give his soul an aliyah, raise it up closer to God. There is a tradition that when the soul leaves the world, I forget, I was going to ask you guys what it's called about science, where no material, what's that called, that energy goes somewhere? There you go. Well, the Jewish tradition believes that there's a conservation of the soul's characteristics. Whatever Opa, Dad was, the characteristics that he had are floating in the air now. And we have a chance to grab them and put them into us and make them part of who we are. And I think that's really what, Michael, you were saying, that we all carry a piece of him in us, and we can choose the pieces that we want to build on. Dad's name was Eliezer ben Shlomo. Eliezer, Hashem is my help, God is my help. The son of Shlomo, peace. Dad, may you feel the embrace of God's love and forever be at peace. Please, in the name of me and my family, forgive us for anything we did to hurt you, for any time we didn't honor you, and for anything that we couldn't do to ease your suffering. Lech v'shalom. I love you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for everybody who shared. This is a reminder that this is not the end of sharing. This is the beginning. The days, weeks, months, and years, it is now for you to share Ed's life and memories. And I know in the next few days at the Shiva and all the minions will be sharing more. So if people feel in their hearts they have more to share, there will be those opportunities. In his sorrow, Job cried out, Adonai Natan v'Adonai lakach yeshem Adonai mevarach. God has given and God has taken away. Blessed be the name of God. I'm going to ask now that we just have a moment of silence. May the words of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God. Just lower your gaze for a moment and fill your hearts up with Ed's thoughts and memories. Zichrono livracha, may his memory be for a blessing. Into your care we entrust the spirit of Eliezer ben Shlomo. For you keep faith with your children in death as in life. Sustain us that we may meet with serenity the mysteries that lie ahead, knowing that when we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you, God, are with us. A loving friend in whom we put our trust. You are the light of our life, our hope in eternity. May the memory of Edgar Egon Stern endure among us as a blessing. In your time, O God, when we too are called to eternity, may we leave this life secure in the faith that in your light we shall see light. In life and in death we cannot go where you are not, and where you are, hope endures. Sustained by this assurance, we invoke your almighty name, and let us all say, Amen. In Judaism, at the funeral, it's traditional to say two famous prayers, El Mole Rachamim, seeking mercy for Ed's soul, and the Mourner's Kaddish, which we will be saying later on at the graveside. But I will chant now these ancient holy words as we seek mercy for Ed's soul. El Mori Rachamim, Shochem Bamromim, Hamse Menucha, Nechona Tachat Kanfei Hashkina, Im Kedoshim, Otorim Gehazar Hakaria Mazhirim, Et Nishmat, Eliezer ben Shlomo, Shalach Lamo, Baal Harachamim, Yaseteru Besater Kenafav Lamim, Vaitror Bitror, Hachaim et Nishmato, Adonai Hu Nachato, Vanuach V'Shalom, Al Mishkavo, V'Nomar, and let us all say, Amen. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Eliezer ben Shlomo, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in your eternal presence, and let his soul be bound up in everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace, and let us all say, Amen. We're going to invite up the pallbearers as we transport Ed to